use cost events, when to use them, how to use their cost reports, and then more detail and scenarios next time. Just as a general note, everybody's muted at this point on the call, but I'll unmute everybody towards the end if you have any questions or comments. You can also use the chat or email feature, or email me directly, Peter Baingasser. If you've got questions along the way, I can try to address them as we go as well. All right, so to get started, I'm going to go real quick here on the green, just make sure everybody knows where this resource is. When you come on the green in the top right corner, you have a little search engine, and if you type in ProLiance, you'll get a ProLiance wiki or a Ryan wiki just for us internally of all the different topics we have related to ProLiance, including the use of cost events, uncommitted cost adjustments, and I don't think we have a specific one for cost reports, but at least the cost events section is in here. On there, we have some previously created training videos. We're doing some new ones now to replace those, but also work instructions for different types of cost events and uncommitted cost adjustments as well. So that's a resource you can always come back to in the future if you need to. To get started, cost events are located in ProLiance under Applications, Contract Management, and then Change Control. It's the only one listed under there. That's your cost events. Now, one thing I recommend, anytime you're doing anything that impacts your ACR, that could be creating a cost event, activating a cost event, contracts, change orders when you go to approve them, anything along the way. As a best practice, I always recommend you open up your ACR, have that open, make the change, whether it's edit or workflow, save those changes, and then come back and refresh your ACR. The ACR won't automatically refresh, so you do have to force it to do that, but it reloads usually within 30 seconds and gives you the chance to verify that the changes you made had the impact you planned. So that's the best practice I always recommend, especially for people first getting used to ProLiance and our ACR setup, how the different documents, cost events, contracts, and whatnot interact with the ACR. It's a really quick way to catch things if something's off. It's easy to fix early on, right after you do it. If you wait to the end of the month, what tends to happen is you've done 10, 20, 30 different changes over the course of the month, and it's a lot harder to figure out which one of them had an impact and then figure out how to fix it. So it can save you just a lot of time. If something goes wrong, people, we're all human. We typo, fat finger something, add an extra zero, forget a zero, something like that along the way. It's really easy to happen. It's easy to catch if you go ahead and do that refresh of that ACR right away and make sure that you see the big picture impact that you expected to see. So under change control, cost events, we'll go in here. Very first thing, this is your register view. If you haven't seen one of these before in ProLiance, if you're new, right at the top is your views. Standard and basic come out of the box with ProLiance, and they're crap views, so please don't use them. Go ahead, go to Manage Views right away, and you'll see a whole list of shared views. These are all views that we have created, somebody within Ryan has created for everyone to use. One of the ones I like to use as a default in the cost event is called Full Register. Just go ahead and click it and hit Apply. This just organizes all the cost events that have been created in numerical order. So it's just a nice, quick, easy way to organize the view. You can create your own custom views if you want. In the future, you can copy these and manipulate them, add some filters if you want, change the columns that show up. But this is a good standard one that's available that you don't have to do any editing on. One thing you'll note here in this register view on this test project that I'm on, there's some cost events that the numbers are just numbers, a 3-digit number, and then there's some that have the CE and then a 3-digit number. These first 5, these are what are called uncommitted cost adjustments, and the rest of them are full cost events. The document setup is the same on both. The difference being is how they impact the ACR. So I'll go to the ACR real quick just to show you this. So an uncommitted cost adjustment is an ACR cleanup tool. It only impacts the uncommitted cost column of the ACR. It doesn't show up in the cost events in any way, shape, or form. Uncommitted cost adjustments are a one-time correction. So you draft them once you're set, make your changes, you activate it. That change happens to the uncommitted cost, and then it gets closed, and they're no longer editable or reusable. Cost events are completely different. You create them, you activate them, you can work with them in their active state, and then you either hand them off to contracts, or if the issue goes away, you can go ahead and close them. So that's just the main difference between those two. When things are going really well, you'll probably only do an uncommitted cost adjustment once a month for your cleanup at profit projection time, whereas you might be creating cost events daily or weekly to track different issues, contract buyouts, RFIs, things like that. So to dive into the cost events, first thing to note is when should you use a cost event? And really it's for pretty much every type of cost you're going to track on the ACR. Put it into a cost event first. The main reason for that is what we're going to cover in the second half of this session, which is cost reporting. All of our cost reporting tools center around the use of cost events. So if you put everything into a cost event, whether you're going to write a contract, a change order, you're tracking an allowance, a cost issue, an owner change order, whatever that detail it is, it's going to have some type of cost impact, whether it's revenue or expense-based on the project. If you put it in a cost event, you can report on it. And we're working on enhancing those reporting tools so they get even more streamlined. But right now I have found you can pretty much eliminate the use of all your side tracking spreadsheets through the proper use of cost events. So I'll go through that more towards the end, but just to know that's the reason why I put everything in a cost event and then let it flow through the rest of the ACR through the use of handoffs to contracts or change orders. 95% of the information that you put into a cost event gets directly handed off into that contract or change order, so you don't lose any of that detail. There's very little additional information you have to add at the next stage. So when you put it in the cost event, you're really creating that one draft and it just moves forward. You're not having to recreate the wheel 2 or 3 times down the road. We'll start with a new one. You'll note when I come in here under new that there's 3 types. The last one we already talked about, uncommitted cost adjustment, that's your cleanup tool. The other 2 are both regular cost events. They just have different default settings. I'd say probably most of the time, 80% or more, you'll spend doing just expense-only cost events. So I'll start with that. But I'll show you the settings, and if I have time, we'll go through an example of the both, or revenue or both as well. So when that cost event opens up, the only required field to hit save is a title. I usually like to keep it pretty short, easy to remember and find for somebody else. Maybe it's HVAC contract buyout. Whatever makes sense. One good thing that you can put in this field, if you have an owner that has their own tracking numbers, this might be a good thing to put in there. Target uses TCOs, so if this is an owner change order, put the TCO number in there. GSA has their tracking numbers. You can put that in there. It makes it really easy to find and connect our reports to third-party reports as well. Title is also used. You can find it through the ACR, and you can also, this also shows up in your reporting as well. Doc description is an optional field. I do recommend filling it out because it shows up in some of our reports. So it's an additional level of detail you can build. If this is a short, a fragmented sentence, you maybe put a full sentence worth of description here in the doc description. If this was a bulletin, bulletin 25, maybe this is the release date, released on October 4th, 2013, whatever. Full description and notes, these are not reported, so if you choose to use these are just for internal Ryan notes. Helpful if you have a large project team, maybe you did something a little goofy, maybe some additional details that you want to have for reference for a PA or other project members to look at. Reason code is not required, but I really recommend you get in a habit of using. This allows you to quickly filter reports, and I'll show you that tool later. But this is a very powerful tool that allows you to filter, sort, and organize different cost reports for different reasons. For instance, creating contingency reports, allowance reports, buyout reports, things like that. If you utilize the reason codes, you'll get that. You can start typing if you know the reason code description. Otherwise, if you click the little hourglass over here, you get the full pick list of available options. We have a pretty comprehensive list, but if you find something that is it'll be valuable to all projects within Ryan to add to this description list, feel free to reach out to myself or Morgan Trainer. We can definitely consider it to be added to the list. We just don't want to add something that's very customized to a single project because this list is available to all projects. But you can see here allowances, back charges, buyout savings, direct costs. Direct costs, this is what I recommend. If you had a budget for HVAC of $1 million on a project and you go to buy it out, that initial contract value is a direct cost. That's kind of the definition I've always used. Extra work orders, field conditions, you've got weather in here, strike. So there's a lot of pretty comprehensive lists of options available already in this list for you. So those are the key things I recommend filling out on this main page. These other areas down here are really not that critical for any reporting, so if you choose to use these, feel free, but they're not necessarily going to feed into other reports we currently have available. Once all this is filled out, you can go ahead and hit save. Click it here. And once it's saved, you'll see the cost event at the top. It gives me my title, and it now assigns the cost event number up here at the top. So this has been saved into the system now. The initial state is draft. At this point, it does not show up on the ACR. The workflow states that we have are draft, active, closed, and canceled. So draft does not impact the ACR, active and closed do. Canceled does not impact the ACR. So just as a quick rule of thumb. Reasons to use closed versus active. Active to me means there's open cost. You haven't issued all the change orders or contracts from that cost event, and it has a dollar value still that hasn't been committed into one of those documents. So that's why you leave it in active. Closed is once you've written all the change orders, go ahead and close it. Do you have to close it? No, but it's valuable if you want to sort a report in the future. You can filter off those closed ones because you've written all the contracts, written all the change orders. So it's just a filtering tool is really the main reason to workflow that to closed. As we come across the screen here, the next one over is financial summary. Once we have some line items added, this will give you a quick recap of how it's impacting revenue, expense, and the over-under. The over-under is the equivalent to the variance column in the ACR. So right now, for instance, I see here this is a negative $37,000 on this test job. If I had an over-under of a positive $30,000, I would expect that to offset almost all of this value. So that's a quick way to reference how this is going to impact the overall ACR based on that over-under value. I'm going to skip the line items just for a minute to show the settings, and then we'll come back and go into the line items in detail. On the settings page, there's really only two fields to take note of. One of them is automatically create drawdowns, and the other one is the line item default type. I'll start down here because this is a little more straightforward. Line item default type. When you go and add a line item, that single line item can represent expense-only costs, revenue-only costs, or both, meaning both revenue and expense at the same time. When you add the line item, it's going to read whatever this setting is, meaning if you added 2 or 3 line items with an expense only, then you came back to the settings, changed this to both, and added a 4th line item. The 4th line will be a both, but the other 3 will remain as expense. This doesn't impact any of the existing lines. It only impacts the next line item you add, just for general reference here. Automatically create drawdowns. this impacts how the cost event interacts with the ACR. When I come over here to the ACR, if I look at this line item here, site utilities, you can see I have an uncommitted cost of $60,000. That was my budget revision that was added at some point, gave me a $60,000 budget to work with on site utilities. By leaving that box checked, automatically create drawdowns. When I create a cost event, it's going to come down and draw that value down from the $60,000. So if I add a line item for $10,000 worth of site utility work, when I activate that cost event, it's going to take $10,000 out of uncommitted, move it into the cost event, and reduce my uncommitted value down to $50,000. They'll still have an EAC at that point of $60,000, so I'll have no variance. Now, the one thing to note with drawdown, it'll never go below zero. So if I create a line item worth $70,000, it's going to come in here, draw the full $60,000 down to zero. The cost event will be worth the full $70,000. My EAC will be worth $70,000, and I'll be $10,000 in the hole for that line item. So that's how those drawdowns work. There are instances where you will create an expense-only line item type, and you may want to uncheck this box. So in the main example, most of the time, you're going to be balancing the ACR horizontally across the row. So you've got a budget, you're going to draw down from that budget to create a contract or create a change order, and you're staying within that budget, so you're balanced horizontally. The main instance that you may balance vertically is the use of contingency. So if you had a line item where you had no scope left, you have no budget left in architect's fee, so you're going to use contingency, you'd create a cost event where it's got a positive value in the architect's fee and a negative value in your contingency. At that point, the cost event itself is balanced to zero, so you can uncheck that drawdowns because the cost event is a balanced cost event. The other instance where you uncheck this box, and this is the default setting when you select that other type of cost event, the cost event revenue/both. At that point, the line item default is both, and it unchecks the automatically create drawdowns. The reason for that is when you create a both line item, you get a budget of $10,000 and you get a cost event for $10,000. So that cost event, again, is a balanced cost event, and it doesn't need to draw down from the original budget. All right, I'm going to go flip this back to expense and check that. That's the default for an expense type, and I'll go into the line items page now. This is the real detail, the heart of the cost event, the line items. There are two portions to every line. There's a top and a bottom. This is considered a parent-child relationship, so the details on the top and the bottom are linked, and you do need to fill out fields in both sections in order for your line to be complete. You'll notice when I clicked Add, the very first column here is expense or item type, so this is telling me this is an expense-only line item. Next field over, or the first field you're going to fill out is an item description. This is your text. This is what are you doing? You know, labor and materials for RFI 12. Whatever that description of work, of the scope of work is, go ahead and put it in there. If you want to put quantities, hours, billable rates, whatever makes sense to put in there as a description, go ahead and type that out. This field, it has at least 100-character limit or something, so you can write a sentence or two in there and you're not going to run out of space. As you move across, there are 4 columns in blue. These are your expense columns. Headings are a little bit hidden here, but it's preliminary expense, revised expense, quoted expense, and adjusted expense. You can use any of the 4 fields. I just start to tend on the left, preliminary expense, and move to the right. I don't really follow the descriptions at the top. Proliance is always going to read the right-handmost column that has a non-zero value. What that means is if I plug in $1,000, and maybe this is my order of magnitude for an RFI before I've talked to the sub, that's the value it's going to read. If I come back and the sub actually provided me a quote of $1,200, I can plug that in, and you can see now this applied expense is reading the next column over. If I go back and I say, hey, you inflated this number, you put too much PM time in, or typo or something along the way, that really should have been $900. I can go in here and you can see it's again revised to whatever the last updated column is. Now the one thing to note is if you decide you ever want to zero out a line item, maybe you don't want to delete the line but you want to keep it, but you want it to be worth $0, you do have to delete or enter a 0 in for each of those fields. Because what happens is otherwise it's just going to go backwards and read the next non-zero value. So I had to plug in zeros in all three of those fields to get the line item back to $0. All right, so got $1,000 plugged in. As we move across, the next field on the top that you want to fill out is this target expense contract reference. What this line item does is it locks this line item to be connected to one very specific contract. If you know the title of the contract, you can just start typing. Otherwise, you can go to the pick list and see what's available. I recommend that you title your contracts with your subcontractor's name and then the brief description of their work. A long time ago when we first got into ProAlliance, we only did the description of work. A lot of subs perform multiple scopes, and it's easier to recognize the subcontractor than it is to necessarily recognize what did we title their base contract. Because maybe we bought them out for plumbing and then we added sprinkler protection a month later when we bought out that scope, something like that. So I always put the subcontractor title in first so I can use that. So I can go ahead and click add, and that shows up. So now this guarantees no matter what happens, this line item will only be connected to Master Mechanical. On the bottom, we only have two fields to fill out. One of them is the item description, and I always just copy and paste the top description into the bottom. The reason for this is there's a number of places in ProAlliance that read either the top or the bottom item description, and for consistency, it's just easier if the description's the same in both. So I always just do a copy-paste, make it nice and easy on myself. The account reference here, the cost code, this is where it's taking the text description of the code. So if I go back to my ACR here, and what was that one? Site Utilities has a $60,000 budget, so I'm going to work on that one. I can just start typing in site, and it's going to pull up all the active cost codes that meet that description. And then when I hit tab, it'll populate in the advanced code. So that's the full code number, not just the description. I always make sure to hit tab and verify that I get the right code and the right type. Occasionally, I know Site Utilities is one of these instances. We do have in our chart of accounts a Site Utilities M code and P code as well as this S code. So if you activated more than one version of that, you want to make sure that you're writing this line item to the correct type, not just the right code description. So I always hit tab. For every line item that you add, you only want to do one line item on the top and at the bottom. You can see down here in the bottom, it technically allows me to add or remove line items. You always want to leave this at a 1-to-1. ProAlliance itself can handle this one-to-many, so you could have one line item at the top and 2 or 3 at the bottom. But when it integrates into our other systems, which include Textura and E1, this bottom portion errors out the system. So we always leave this at a 1-to-1. Every description you want, create a new line item at the top with only the single line item at the bottom. For every line item you add, you have to put a cost account reference here before you can save. So at this point, I've got my cost code in, I can save it. If I go ahead and add a second line item and I want to save it real quick, because I haven't entered a cost code, at this point it's going to error out and prevent me from saving it. So you'll see this cost account reference must be selected for each line item. At this point in time, I can simply, if I just needed to do a quick save, I could just come in here and only give it the cost code purely to save. But I do recommend that you probably save every 5 line items that you add. So if you're doing a scope schedule of values that's 20, 30, 50, 100 line items long, make sure to save this about every 5 so that you don't accidentally skip a cost code. It's really common to do that on accident, and it's a pain in the ass to go backwards and try to figure out when you're 20 lines in which one did you miss, because it only tells you that a line item has this. It doesn't identify which line item has the problem. The other thing is Proliance does have a timeout issue. So it'll let you keep adding line items without ever saving, and it'll let you do this for all day long if you wanted to. The problem is Proliance itself will time out. I believe it's after about a half hour, 45 minutes, which means if you're doing 20, 30, 40 line items and you're putting a lot of detail in as you go, the system could time out from the last time you hit save. We've had this once or twice happen to people, and there's no way we can recover it. If you hit save, it restarts the clock on that timeout. So anytime you do an action, you're okay. But if you're not saving regularly, you're not doing an action, that's resetting that timeout clock. All right. I'm going to just throw in one more line item in here for reference. Copy that. Oops. Copy that into the bottom. And we'll make this line item up on the top worth $1,500. All right, so at this point in time, I can go ahead and save this. I've got a cost account in both of those. Now that I've hit save, I can go back to my financial summary. This is an expense-only line item. The cost event's worth $2,500, and unless there's money to draw down from, I'm going to have a $2,500 impact on my ACR. Right now, it's in draft mode, so even though I've saved this and made this updated, if I go ahead and refresh my ACR, there's not going to be a change yet on the ACR. You can see here I'm still at 60,000 and uncommitted. As soon as I workflow this to active, you can choose to copy team members if you want. For instance, if you want to send it to a PA, hey, you're activating it, and you can go ahead and write contracts or change orders right away. You can see, put that workflow, send it to the PA, and say, please issue contracts or change orders from this cost event. Instead of having to send a separate email, you can do that from a Proliance notification. Now that that's active, I can go ahead and refresh the ACR again. Come down here to my site utilities, and I now have a cost event for $2,500, and it's drawn down that value from uncommitted. So you can see my EAC stayed at 60,000. I'm within my budget, and that drawdown's taken place. Within the cost event here, I can click on any one of these cells from the ACR. So I come in here, and you can see control document. This is a link right back into the cost event that I'm already working on. I got the line items that have the detail, and here's my description of work. So that's why it's really important. I can't tell you for sure if this is reading the top or bottom line item, but because I copied it into both, I have that item description available here to go with the dollars as well. So you can really quickly through the ACR dive into these costs and find out where they're coming from. Now, the next thing to cover with this is the handoff. So any one of these line items can be handed off to a contract or a change order. It's a slightly different process if it's a contract versus a change order. I'm going to go through the change order one today just because it's the most common. When we do the contract training, I'll show how to do that in that training session, which is, I think, in a couple weeks. So if you want to hand these line items off to a change order, you can do this either from the cost event or from a new change order. It doesn't matter which end you do it at. If you're in the cost event, I call that a push because you're pushing it from the cost event into the change order. If you're in a change order, you're reaching back into a cost event and pulling details in. So you're either doing a push or a pull, but in both cases, it's still a handoff. To generate that from the cost event, when you're in edit mode, go to Expense Tools and hand off to New Change Order. It's going to save the document. Go ahead and allow that. And you can either have it select from the target contracts, which I had filled out Master Mechanical, so I can go ahead and click Add. Or if I'd left them blank, which I did on the bottom one, you can do Select All. But again, if you put that target contract in there, it's only going to let you select Master Mechanical only going to let you select that one contract, so you're not going to accidentally cross cost event line item into the wrong cost code. Once that contract's listed, hit next. I'm going to go ahead and do add remove. So this is get the line items. In this case, I can go ahead and select both of them. So I'm going to do select all and hit OK. If I only wanted to do one of them at this time and leave the other one untouched, you can go ahead and do that. You don't need to do them all at the same time. So once they're added in the bottom, hit OK. They pop up here on my list. I can go ahead and hit next. Now this is really important in the handoff. The top description by default is the one to use when you're going into an expense contract or expense change order. The bottom description is what you use when you go into a revenue contract or revenue change order. Understanding of the difference here is create one schedule of values line item for each cost event line item. This means I've got 2 line items in the cost event. When the handoff's complete, I'll have 2 line items in my schedule of values. The bottom option, which goes into the which we use for our revenue contracts and change orders, creates one new schedule of values for each cost event, regardless of the number of line items. Meaning I've got 2 line items in this cost event. If I select the bottom option, I only get 1 line item in the contract or change order. So we want to retain the detail on the expense. We tend to summarize the detail in our revenue management. So that's the difference between those two. Go ahead and select next. And there's only one template to use, so I can go ahead and select finish. Anytime you generate a handoff to a change order from a cost event, you're always going to create a new change order for that subcontractor. What that means is if you started to draft a change order for this sub already, so change order 3 had previously been created, I can't push from the cost event into an already existing change order. It's always going to create a brand new change order. So if you've got a draft one, you're always going to want to do a pull, and that's always got to be from the change order itself. As far as retaining that detail, I'm going to show you here in my schedule of values. If I expand these line items, you can see here I've got all that detail I put into the line items page in the cost event carries forward into the schedule of values page for my contractor change order. I've got my descriptions on both the parent and child line item. I've got my cost code. I've got my dollar values. All that information is carrying forward. The other thing you get is on the top portion of that line item, you get a cost event reference. So this is one other thing to review now. When you have created the cost events first, when you go to review a contract or change order, verify that this link is here. If this link is here, is gone, it's broken, that means something happened in the handoff state and that link was removed. And that can mean you can end up with a potential double up on your ACR. If this link isn't there, you can end up with a value in your cost event and a value in your contract, so you're doubling up on that expense. So it's really important just to verify this link is here and it's functioning when you go ahead and approve or execute a contract or change order. These do happen occasionally for unknown reasons. Usually it's because you've done something that gives you a warning, hey, I'm going to break this link if you continue. So if you'll see that warning most of the time. Maybe 5% of the time where just a fluke in the system. You interrupted the process and the link gets broken. It's maybe a 2-minute process to fix, so it's not a big deal to fix, but you do want to catch it before you execute that contract or change order. Once it's executed, you can't fix that link. All right, I'm going to go ahead, go back to the cost event. That's the summary of how to set up a cost event. I'm going to take 1 minute or 2 minutes here real quick and just show the revenue both. It's basically identical. When I do a new revenue both, PCO number 2, and save this, when I go into my settings page, you'll see the line item type is both, and it's unchecked that drawdown box. So if I go back to my ACR, I'm going to just pick, looks like access floor cleanup. This line item's got no budget and it's got no expenses, so it's a $0 all the way across. So I'll use this line item as the example. I go ahead and add a line, put a description in, give it $1,000. Down here at the bottom, you want to match the description, and then I'm going to give it the cost code. Tabbed over, gave me the advance code. I'm going to save this. And I'm going to activate it. So while that's updating, just a real quick on the financial summary, you can see that line in was both. So I've got $1,000 in revenue and $1,000 in expense. And when I go back to my ACR and hit refresh, should just take a minute. And now you'll see under my pending budget revisions, this is the revenue portion of that cost event line item. And then I've got $1,000 in the cost event. So this line is balanced because it's representing both at the same time, and it's showing up under both halves of my ACR. Again, I can click under this cell. I can see that cost event popping right up. If I didn't have it open, it would open it up for me just by clicking through to it. So really quick and easy to investigate it. Handing off line items to revenue works exactly the same as it does for expense. So you don't have to go in and do a budget upload if you've created a cost event that's representing that revenue or that owner change order. All right, next topic to hit here is the basics of cost reporting. So that's all based off the use of cost events. And under dashboards, so applications dashboards and then financial dashboards, we actually have a cost event report. So this is called the cost event log. This is the same page that you go and do your profit projections over here on the right when those are active at the end of the month. You've also got project reports with the cost event log. This log can take a couple minutes to load, so don't be afraid if you see this spinning. Depending on the size job and how much detail you have, this could take 30 seconds to load, or this could take 3 minutes to load. So just don't be afraid if you see that and it's spinning for a little bit. It just depends on the project, how long this takes. Up at the top here are all these default settings. These are all filters and options on how you can group the report. There's an upgrade happening right now that's going to give you one more option as well. That other option is the option to filter by reason code. So that should be available here shortly. It's in the testing phase right now. The default settings is set up to mimic the cost event column of your ACR. So it's going to look very similar to this. It's just going to break out into detail. So you can see here the first two line items on my ACR. It's $1,000 under general conditions and $11,000 under soup PM cell. And if I go back to my report, I've got my details for the $1,000 and my details for the $11,000 for the soup PM cell. It's going to be that same way up and down this report and how it ties out to the ACR. But I can change this very easily. One of the main ways to consider changing this is how you group the information. For instance, if I group this by cost event number and click View Report, so rerun, and what those cost event numbers is, that's your individual issues. So it's nice to see that when you group it by the cost account, it's nice to see it because it represents how it looks on the ACR. But for owner reports, you might want to look at just the grouping it by cost event number because each of those numbers is an issue. It's a contract buyout, it's an allowance, it's a buyout savings, or owner change order. So it's going to group all of those together for you simply by changing in how you group. Another way you can do this is by subcontractor. That subcontractor is reading off of the target contract reference field. What that means is if you have a line item that you haven't handed off yet and you didn't put a target contract in, that subcontractor field is going to be blank. You can see here this is one that wasn't handed off, but we did have a target subcontract listed, and so it shows up here and it would group that separate. Other items, you can group by expense only or revenue and both. I know revenue's doubled up, but if you're doing an owner report or a revenue-based report, check both of these boxes. Can't really tell you why, but there's two different types of revenue in the system, and so we have to do it as two separate filters. Most of the time I find, though, I'm running reports just off the expense, even if a line item is both. Cost event state. So this is really easily. You can report on any state of cost event. You can report on just draft ones. So if you've got some draft owner change orders, you could just report on those, or if you only want to report on actives, you can go ahead and change that filter really quickly. Expense handed off. So this is reading that column here, the expense committing document. If this is blank, that means that you haven't handed off the, oh shoot, I closed my report. If that's blank, that means you have not handed it off to a contractor change order. And at that point in time, that field's going to come back as no, it's not handed off. If you have handed it off, that field will have a link to a document, and so then it will come back as a yes. So cost event number, and if I change this to select all, this will show me all line items in the cost event regardless of whether they've been handed off or not. Same thing for the revenue, whether they've been handed off or not. If you're doing just expense, though, I always leave the revenue as select all. So I'll rerun this report. So now I changed the value, so it's going to do both handed off and non-handed off. And you can see here in the right, there's a quick description of that, yes or no, depending on the cost event in question. Let's see here with this. What's nice about this report is you can go ahead under here, select formats, change this to Excel, and hit export. And this will go ahead and open up an Excel for you. So now you can click edit mode and go to town, give it a new title. Maybe you don't want to show all of these columns. You can go ahead and do that. If it didn't filter everything quite the way you wanted to, you can go ahead and hide or delete some rows if you needed to make the report match what you wanted to show an owner. So this can really replace allowance tracking, buyout tracking. It can replace contingency tracking, and what's the other big one? I'm blanking off the top of it. But a cost issue log, just a general cost issue log, like RFIs and things like that. So this report really has the flexibility to do all of those different things depending on the different types of options of how you structure those filters. Last thing with this report is how it sorts. There's a group sort, so what that's going to read is the group type, if it's cost event number or cost account. It'll just go ahead and resort those groups for you based on whatever you've selected at the top. Sometimes what will happen is if you have within a cost event, here's a good example, cost event 17, they didn't show up in the numerical order like they would in the ACR. So it probably showed up the way they were entered. So this line item was probably entered first, and then this line item was entered second. Within the header, there's these little arrows for advanced code. I can go ahead and click sort. Now if I go down to 17, it resorted within that group based on the numerical order of the cost account. You can only do that for one of the fields within the header. Usually the one I end up doing is the advanced code. The other way you can do reports on cost events if you need to, that's a little more flexible. Like I said, there's a lot of built-in templates that you can do from this, but maybe you just need something really custom for your owner. If I go back to the cost events register, you can actually export your register view into Excel for a report. What that means is if I want to create my own version of this register so that I get a different view from my owner, I can go ahead and manage views, copy a view that's close to what I want. So let's just say it's the full register. Go ahead and save that. That becomes a personal view, so they show up at the top, and then I can go ahead and edit it. So now I can come in here and add some columns if I want some additional columns. Maybe I want reason code, or I don't want reason code, so I can take that off. But I want doc description, so I can throw that in. I can resort where that shows up in the list. and then I can add my own custom filters. So current state, I want it to be only active. So then I can go ahead and hit add. So at this point, I can go ahead and save that and then apply that view. And you can see there, quickly filtered that, and then I can export this into Excel for use to an owner. So that's a really quick, flexible way to create some reports. It's a little less standardized. You got to do a little more with the formatting once you get out, but it does give you the flexibility to provide a custom report for an owner. All right, that's the recap I have. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone. If you have questions, more than willing to stay on the line. We've got at least another 10 minutes. Otherwise, feel free, if you got some questions afterwards, to shoot me emails or give me a call. My extension is 4790. I'm happy to talk to you. So, any questions? All right. Well, that's everything I have. So thanks for joining me today. I'll stay on the line for a little while longer if anybody's got questions. Otherwise, that's it for today.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.